Welcome back to the Wondrous Atlas of Creation's Destiny, the comprehensive guide to all places and plots exalted. I am your host, Rails, and...
This is your co-host, Aramithius.
So, coming now into the plot-hooking, storytelling bit of this solar episode, this is again going to be just as dense and just as free-floaty, because we're dealing with an entire Exalt type. There's quite a bit you can do.
Yes, just as a warning, we are going to be going broad. Future episodes of this podcast, when we get down to doing locations, are going to be a bit more focused. But this is kind of dealing with general types of story rather than the kind of micro types of story, if you like. So we're looking at plots that are based off the nature of solars and what that means for the types of story you can tell.
So, to open up then, one of the key parts of a solar is the reincarnation, is the memories, is the baggage of one's past lives. And there are lots of ways that you as a storyteller can use those. Worst case scenario, just to push to the moment of panic, this provides you as a storyteller an out if you've tried to be writing let's say a mystery or some other thing, and your players just aren't getting it. You can have the answer pretty much come to them in a dream, because it might have happened before.
Yes, the kind of, if your players aren't particularly responsive to your subtle nudges, which can happen, then you can just get increasingly unsubtle, and this is one good way of doing that. And so you can make things appear that you have very vivid or poignant dreams that are going to either involve plot elements or involve plot contexts, I think, is possibly the best way to do it. We were chatting before the cast that make it so that it's the same sort of thing, but rewind the clock. And so having it as the vision of the previous exaltation gives you that much more in terms of how to expand things out. And it also helps give gravitas to the stories. I mean, the best way to get players involved is to get them relating to characters, but if there aren't potentially characters to get them to relate to, this is a good shortcut for saying this is going to be important. It's a way of signposting and linking what's going on with the greater plot of the world, as well as just the story.
Yeah, and equally on a less meta level, using the rediscovering your past lives, rediscovering your other memories and stuff like that. There are some specific stories that really only Exalted can do that lend itself really well to using that, and that is the long game, pretty much. There's lots of cases in all of the books of someone's, mentioning the Solar Lunar Mate system seems to be slightly taboo in this edition, but it's a whole thing of someone who knew one of your past versions and can still... They seem to flip from author to author and from chapter to chapter in some cases on whether or not supernatural beings can recognise you as the exaltation versus you as the person. But that basically means you as a storyteller can decide if they can or not.
Yes, it makes it very, very easy to kind of hook things in as to what things mean. And again, leveraging the existing connections, potentially also as exposition as well. Obviously, don't do the thing of just huge, great info dumps of dialogue, but if you can produce a context between characters that is assuming the spark and the exaltation that is going to suggest things to the players, then it makes it that much easier to set the scene.
And equally, it lends itself to one of the sort of, if you're running a game for people that are used to D&D, Pathfinder, your more standard, go in the cave, hit the thing, steal the treasure sort of game. Using this sort of bit of your past life memories, it kind of lets you... I don't want to say pull the rug out on them from that, but if you are doing the sort of archetypal, here's a dungeon crawl in a manse, go find the cool magical artifact, and then as they're going through it, no, this isn't just some dungeon, this was your house. You remember this. That's where the kitchen is. That sort of bit. You can pull the emotion in slowly through the back door, almost.
Yeah, absolutely. It just gives it that much more weight. And it also means that you can potentially make it different to your standard dungeon crawl as well, that it's not necessarily something that is going to be full of things that will kill you, but it's just a way of playing out the discovery, so to speak. unless you are going to start introducing lethal elements somewhere, I would suggest that this is done as a prelude type thing, or maybe as an all-party prelude or something, so that the players get a sense of their characters as a whole, because a lot of kind of going through and discovering what you are and how you were just sets up that level of understanding of a character. So have it early on, and it also potentially serves as a way to bond a party of Solas together. If you find they're pulling in different directions, but they all suddenly find that their characters were a circle in a previous life, then they have that much more in the way of meaning to link them together.
It also lets you really play up the post-apocalyptic aspects that Exalted occasionally nudges with. I don't know if it's a trope. I've not seen enough public games where it's happened to confidently call it a trope, but I really like the thing of, no, this dungeon you were struggling with, no, this was yours, or this was some benign civilian thing back in the day. Again, the standard one with me is the only one I've used of, no, this was your house. And now it is ruined, and everything is burned out, and there's ghosts and all the whole rest of the bit. Look at what has become of the Wonders.
The way that I kind of imagine that is kind of blink and they kind of see flashes of what it was. If you've seen the end of Battlestar Galactica, I kind of imagine that sort of a scenario where they come into contact with the wall and they suddenly realise, and then there's a bit of a replay of a past life that goes on in full colour with people and lots of stuff going on that is manifestly different to how it's happening at the moment.
Or, for completely the opposite end of the tonal spectrum, for those of us that haven't seen Battlestar Galactica, that bit in the animated Anastasia movie where the Once Upon a December sequence...
Yes.
Just for two completely different ways of playing that.
That works as well. You can also potentially tailor it a bit for the different casts as well, and they can also provide different types of drama. Like, if you want to set up the search, you can do your standard kind of Lost Temple in the Jungle thing, as much as they're terrible, terrible racist origins for that trope. Then rediscovering it and going full archaeologist is absolutely a Twilight type thing to do. Whereas if you can potentially say that you want to restore something to its former glories, lead people in a particular way, and then you can start bringing in Zenith type elements to make creation great again in some ways.
And if you're not the first person to find it, in come the Dawns.
Absolutely. And it all works that way.
I don't know how you do it with a Nightcast, honestly, other than, like, maybe the old Thief games of, I'm not interested in the building, I'm interested in the loot.
Yes, and then the loot becomes the thing that's the focus. You just shift it to being, instead of about the context, about the artifacts, which the Nightcast will then remember.
Because you can break in the windows and do the whole Batman bit.
Oh, dear. Okay, we probably need to find some ways to make knights not Batman.
The flip side is making them ninjas, which is even more creatively bankrupt, is the problem.
Fair enough.
It's because the casts aren't as strong character things, because intimacies exist, frankly, which are the way that you actually denote what your character is. Your cast doesn't say much other than what you can do, not what you are like. And so it really does just come down to, what's the skill set? Yeah, it's the Batman skill set.
That makes sense, yeah.
Just like the Twilight, the way you refer to a Twilight, is a nerd. Because that's the one inescapable fact of their skill set. They're a nerd.
Yes, which is kind of another way of doing it. I think the stuff that we've talked about pre-episode that we're going through now is leaning a lot on Exalted as something post-apocalyptic, because the other way of doing it is kind of leading people to recreate the first age, which is only something really that Solas can do. No one else has got the mojo to do it.
To be fair, on the whole, like where we've been leaning into the post-apocalyptic, I'd say that is also equally a uniquely Solar thing, because they're the only one that have been out of the picture for a long time. Everyone else has kind of had this contiguously. So it's sort of the thing of, the Solars, for them, they never say how past life memories work, so you can't really say if it's do you just get the last one or do you just get, like, the highlights of whichever ones. But I tend to always imagine that you just get the one that you had before this, because the memories will eventually go out or get filtered down or get jumbled up, but you'll get the clearest ones of the one just before this. For Solars, that's still first age. They come into the picture. The last time they were here, it was the first age. Everything was great. Now they're here. They don't have the Lunas and Sidereals and everyone else, they saw the transition. They are more likely to be not okay with the state of things, but more... A Solar will be the sort of person that will see this and will fight against it, not because, oh, it's unjust, oh, it's bad, but because they genuinely do not understand how you could have done this to the world.
Yeah, although that is, to an extent, playing up the whole kind of notion of the exaltation and the reincarnated memories and all the rest of it are a bigger part of the psyche. You need to be able to talk that through with players as to how much that plays a part, because it can be seen to undermine player agency. You'd need to tread it a little carefully.
Yeah, it's more just that on the meta level, Solar's coming back, all of the setting sort of treats that as this is the big point of change, because they are back. They are the hangover of the first age, which was their age. It's the sort of thing. They are the stand-in for the good times. They were gone, look what happened, now they're back. That sort of thing.
Yeah. And the way that you plan to play that out as a kind of a type of story is to get them to start recreating the first stage, is the way I see it. You can then get a lot of quests that are focused around either gathering the lost knowledge, which is probably going to be the bulk of it, and then the means with which to do the rebuilding. So you'll be tracking down particular types of magical materials, going to particular locations that have particular geomantic properties, that sort of thing, which can make it quite a diverse game. Even if you are trying to just rebuild one kingdom, you're going to be doing a lot of adventuring to bring everything together. You do kind of need a kind of a fount of knowledge to kind of say, oh, we need this, which kind of means that those sorts of games are probably best done with a Twilight present, just because they're going to be the ones who are drawing up the plans and saying, this bit's missing, can we go get it?
Or equally, if you don't want to have a Twilight there, but you still want to have a checklist given, the books do give you the wonderful cop-out for the party that has no interest in any thinking. The Cult of the Illuminated exists, who can give you a quest list.
That is true. The Cult of the Illuminated being the Sidereals who are on the side of the Solars. They can be a kind of your quest giver, if you like. Well, it depends. Depending on how you want to play the Cult of the Illuminated, you can either have them as the quest givers with a Sidereal attached, or you can potentially have them as a cargo cult without a Sidereal. And so they're basically there to fulfill the functions of make the Solars feel good, but not actually be that helpful.
Yeah.
Depending on what narrative way you want to lean it. I mean, to me, that feels like you could lean into the tragedy of the whole thing.
Yeah.
But
I tend to lean into it more as the quest giver, and sometimes even not necessarily as a beneficial thing, but as the lore side of this established, I have issues with Sidereals.
Yes. There will be some quid pro quo, of course, yeah.
They have a goal, it just so happens to use you. But yeah, it's the thing of, they are the people, even as the cargo cult style, even if you don't have a Sidereal in there, their entire theology is all about how sort of great you can all make it. You can even just use them as if they're a cult, if they have any sort of number of people and are established at all, they have the local knowledge. Like, they might not be able to tell you where you can get the crazy artifacts to do whatever insane super duper first stage monument you need, but they can tell you who to talk to find out about ruins. They can tell you who to talk to do this, that, and the other. They have your local knowledge, so they can still kind of serve as not necessarily a quest giver, but definitely a hints box.
Yeah, and also potentially a way to link merits into the game. Because if you have someone with a bunch of followers, but you have no idea what to do with it, a Cult of the Illuminated without outside direction makes sense. I don't know whether we necessarily say that a Cult of the Illuminated is therefore anything that worships Solars. It's a very, very definite term in previous editions, but...
Yeah, I assumed it was a specific entity, and then other Solar cults just kind of are independent things that will pop up around Solars, because that man just lifted a house.
Yeah, there was a whole book about it in, I want to say first edition, but I can't remember.
Yeah, there was a whole book about the Cult of the Illuminated.
Yeah, and there was talk about kind of training camps and all this, that, and the other. That sounded like it was quite a coordinated Sidereal Gold faction thing. They can probably also serve as an elevator to wider things. If your players get bogged down in specific areas, or you just want them to move them on to slightly more involved plots if they're getting perhaps too comfortable with the setting. Using a sidereal in general to yank on a Solar's chain is probably a good way to do it.
Yeah. And equally, they're good to use as grey figures, because their whole thing is that they're manipulative. And you can argue whether or not they're doing a good thing, but they want to manipulate you. That will manifest as giving you quests if you're a heroic party. That will manifest as lying to you if you are off doing your own crazy thing.
Yeah, it's also a good way to kind of have a framework for new players, actually, that if you need an exposition machine that also functions as quest giving, because players aren't used to the amount of power that Exalted gives you, then the Cult of the Illuminated will...
Yeah, here's this funny old man that tells you what to do. You can even really use them as your entire tutorial system by your going for your classic anime kung fu movie training arc.
Yes, and then that can potentially serve as a way of getting people used to the idea of doing descriptions and so on, because montages are a thing.
I am imagining, of course, your Cult of the Illuminated sidereal person here is looking like Lao Bu from Kill Bill.
Or Mr. Miyagi, depending on your flavour.
that depends, but Mr. Miyagi feels more inherently modern.
Yes.
I can't imagine a sidereal in a boiler suit or, like, just a jacket.
If he's pretending to be the monastery's janitor or something, kind of doing the whole Loot C package from Discworld.
Yeah.
But
anyway,
yeah.
For the sidereal episode.
Yes, absolutely for the sidereal episode. We should probably talk about the Immaculate Philosophy for a bit.
They're going to be a feature. Unless you're playing your game in the middle of the Far East where Realm isn't a language anyone's even heard of, you're going to be dealing with Immaculates.
Yes, or at least Immaculate Faithful.
It's the Immaculate Order wherever the Realm has any political power, and in the places where the Realm has shaky power, it's the Order that keeps it there. And then it's just the Immaculate Faith, or the Immaculate Philosophy everywhere else, where it's politically a different entity. At the higher levels, it's the same people.
Yes, and these are kind of your go-to antagonists in a lot of ways. If you're looking for people that can deal with Solars without making them Solars, throw some Immaculate Monks in there. I'd say avoid that, if at all possible, because you need some more context. Which is why, if you're looking to have characters who were Immaculate Monks in pre-Exaltation, or had some ties to the Immaculate Faith at all, or the Immaculate Philosophy, sorry. It, for starters, has some fantastic potential for soul searching. If you can have people that will challenge the new Solar as to why they are different, as to why they shouldn't be exterminated, and grappling with how they feel about becoming the thing that they hated.
You can really make this a push and pull by friends and family as well, frankly. Because the general assumption is that if you encounter a person, they're probably an Immaculate. And so it's the sort of thing of, you, the Solar, have just exalted. I mean, the standard way to really pull on the heartstrings would be, have you exalt in a time of threat, be that fairies, ghosts, whatever, monster of the week, have the nice cool fight scene so that your players can get to grips with the combat system a bit, have a bit of fun whacking things with sticks or blasting things with sunlight nukes or whatever they want to do. And then once you've saved everyone, the village is still getting its pitchforks because you're anathema and you're bad.
Yes, or if you want to kind of lean on the tones of Solar Exaltation still being dangerous, then have some of their powers go on overkill and kill someone they care about in the process. Because Exaltation in general is dangerous. I mean, that tends to get emphasized a bit more with Dragon-Blooded, but it still can be a thing with Solars as well.
As I understood it, Dragon-Blooded Exaltation is dangerous because of the Exaltation. Solar Exaltation is dangerous because of the Exalt, because Solars forget what they were doing at the time of the Exalt, because it's like the standard thing. One of the games that I'm actually being a player in is basically doing the Hangover with your own Solar Exaltation.
Oh, wow.
Of trying to basically backdrive of, you've woken up here, now work out what the hell happened, because you remember being a person and you wake up here, you don't remember the intervening period.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one of the other ways to kind of use the Immaculate Philosophy is that it's not all bad. They can quite often be the ones driving to do the right thing. That's one thing that they've kind of hammered home a bit in some of the Realm books for 3rd edition, is that Immaculate Monks are quite often the ones leading the rebellion, because the local satrap or the local governance or whatever haven't been living up to what the Immaculate Faith says they should be. If the Dragon-Blooded aren't acting as the ordained sons of heaven, or daughters of heaven, sorry, then the Immaculate Order will kick off. So you can start to have Solas potentially, I don't know about necessarily fighting alongside, that's possibly a bit too direct, but having the Immaculate Order in a local sense being very much geared in the same direction as the Solas. So you can say, well, they're both doing the right thing and fighting alongside. Then there's that moment of, oh, we're actually not really wanting to relate in any way, shape, or form, and there's fundamental differences in the reasons as to how things should resolve or whatever.
There's definitely mileage for, and this is probably something to do across like an entire story, of basically trying to open up some of the, and it'd only be the low-level ones, but trying to open up some of the low-level monks of like your local monastery or temple or whatever to maybe don't kill on sight, like trying to be the hero, trying to be good. I think it would play a lot like, yeah, I think the best analogy actually is probably your X-Men or your Spider-Man sort of thing of, he's the superhero that the officialdom dislikes, but he's slowly twisting them over because, look, he is just doing good. And it's that sort of thing. And you can do it with a lot of the lower level Immaculates because they're people, ultimately, and they will... I mean, it works with Origin. They'll believe in what it's actually preaching as ideas more so than the literalism of the lore eventually. And the Immaculate philosophy does pretty much just sort of say... On a theological level, it is pretty much pseudo-Buddhist. It is try and be good to people, try and keep creation going. And so if you, Solar, just keep saving people and helping people and don't be the demon that they keep saying you are, there is a chance for the lower-level ones to be switched around. Actual dragon-blooded ones? Probably not.
No.
The mysterious old man they keep in their basement who writes all their orders? Definitely not. But the human ones... There's mileage there for... I would make it the focus of an entire story of just probably having the two factions of the party on the one hand doing their thing and the local monastery cleaning up the mess almost. And the sort of slowly as they dovetail into the same.
Yeah, it's... And depending on quite how much you want to kind of lean into the character side of it, because I would see that kind of a story as being quite focused on interpersonal relations. And not every party is going to be quite so involved with the kind of dark night of the soul and the philosophical debates happening in character that will involve.
Some of them may just punch them the first time they call them whatever any of the lists of insults for each type of solar that there were, because there's a whole list of them and they're great.
Yeah, the slurs are fantastic. And again, use those and have those in mind when you are trying to critique what the Solars are doing as well. If you're trying to bring up that idea of the ideological conflict, then you can use Immaculate characters to say, we were right about you all along, look at what you've just done, which can then bring about some more soul searching and so on.
Yeah. On the flip side, from the very dramatic, philosophical, more performance-heavy role-playing, I'd say, of that sort of Immaculate game, you can go for what is basically the other end of the standard Dragonblood game for a Wild Hunt one, which, for a Solar game, I wouldn't necessarily say a Solar game can be entirely that. I think a Solar game needs something else, but this as a recurring villain bit works.
One way of doing that is having an empire building Solar game. You build up a kingdom, you build up support, and then you've got the Wild Hunt as an opposing military force in a way. That would happen quite late on, I think. Early on, you're probably dealing a bit more with the sort of the covert, several series of dragon-blooded spies sent to kill you sort of thing. Yeah,
that's the sort of thing. I've always been envisioning the Wild Hunt as pretty much a party of Dragonbloods as compared to an army. But yeah, it's the sort of thing of... I'd almost use a Wild Hunt in the sort of sense I described there as... I wouldn't use it in an empire building game because you're, by necessity, going to be quite static there. But in any one where you are doing a bit of globe-trotting, having them be your ticking clock is a very nice little way of doing it.
Yeah, and a recurring antagonist as well. Yeah. If they can kind of slip through the fingers as the boats, and they can kind of stand there on the shore shaking
waving
their fists while the players sail off to the next destination or whatever. That can work quite nicely. Although, one of the tricky things that I would see with that sort of a setup is... it's difficult to have recurring villains, because where they are literally trying to kill you all the time, you have very little incentive for the player characters to leave them alive.
Yeah. That's why I lean into it more of a chase than a fight, because a stand-up fight, yeah, it either requires you to sort of have one of these people on the thing dick dastardly run away at the last minute, or it sort of requires you to just accept, yeah, they're going to kill them eventually. But having it as a chase, it's like what I say, using them as your ticking clock, that has more mileage to it. Especially if you do the thing of your solo party keeps hearing rumours about the wild hunt that's coming. Because whilst the populace will be very against you if they know what you are, and so you have to be like in your cowls, going like Aragorn into the Prancing Pony through places so that you don't get caught. These guys will be marching into the acclaim and love of the populace because, they're the fabled heroes that have slain the big elemental that was ruining the local field one time. And other such as, you get that nice, it's good not just for the ticking clock, but also for building that sense of contrast of, you know that you are, especially if you've got a Zenith in your party, you were told that you are so much more than them, but you're here cowering in the corner, and they're marching in, receiving all the food, all the drink, all the money.
Yeah, which is a reason why I would tend to go with Wild Hunt as army, personally, because it gives that sense of overwhelming force that you are going to have to do something special, pull something big out of the bag to be able to deal with. If you're dealing with a bunch of specialised killers, a sworn kinship of dragon-blooded that are just designed to infiltrate and kill anyone they find, that is less likely to result in a chase scenario, in my opinion. It depends. You can potentially give them reasons for it to be a chase rather than a kill. One of the ways that I would do that is have them either know or be friends with the members of the Wild Hunt from before the Exaltation, so they're going against their existing intimacies to do that. That would require some coordination with the players to start with, though.
Or equally, and again, this is entirely... I'll put my hands up here and say, the entire reason that I put so much into this, I never really even conceived of the, this is an entire army still getting called a wild hunt. I assumed it was always a party, because I assumed it was always a thing that dragons did, and you don't send mortals on it, because that's a way to get them killed. Even then, if you still have them outnumber the party significantly, it doesn't have to be to the order of tens, hundreds, or whatever. It's like, again, my standard group has 2 players, and so it's a sort of thing, a party of 5 dragons, that's still dangerous enough that, yeah, okay, you might make the mistake of, they're just dragons, I can take them. You'd make that mistake once.
Yeah. Particularly if you build them well. I've seen situations where you've had 3 dragon-blooded take down a solar very handily.
I mean, this is one of the advantages of 3rd edition focusing on balance so much. It's, even though fluff-wise, you probably still do want to be fielding 4 or 5 dragons to each solar. Like, mechanically, you can probably do it with 2 or 3. Maybe even 1 if you're lucky.
I mean, that depends to an extent on players, because if they're still trying to be undercover, then yes, they'll have more opportunity to kill the solar. Whereas if the solar is prepared to go in all guns blazing, then it's going to be a serious problem. But you'll have them blowing off 20, 30 essence by the second round of combat, and they will have flattened anything that comes anywhere near them.
But then that's one of the things you can do with with Exalted in general, really, but with Solars particularly, because of their whole shtick, is it's less the can you do this, because the answer, for Solars especially, is almost always yes, but it's should you? And that's sort of thing, the price of power sort of thing that you can do with them.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on quite how much your players are willing to put up with the game of consequences. It's impressing on them reasons not to do certain things beforehand. With Solars, a lot of it is making them feel the weight of the choices. You are dealing with big stakes, you are dealing with world-shaking power. Act like that means something, is the way that needs to be done.
I was going to say, it's the standard example, in that case of the dragons are fighting you, but you're trying to stay undercover. It's like, you could drop this guy in, 2 turns flat, but the moment you start showing that anima off, you're not welcome in this town anymore.
Yes.
And are you willing to pay that price? Are you willing to basically be kicked out of here to win this fight, or will you sort of take your lumps where the dragon beats on you a bit and then is satisfied, okay, you're probably just a mortal or something like that, and leaves?
Yeah, that's fair enough. And as much as the dragons are sort of the standard antagonist, we talked a bit about solar antagonists. What would you do to make decent solar antagonists?
Solars as antagonists, Solars as villainous. I will go that one step beyond with them. Honestly, I think they have the most mileage. Just like they have the most mileage for heroics, they have the most mileage for not necessarily evil per se. There are some abyssals, infernals that are keyed directly to being nefarious even when they're trying to be nice, but solas are best for your grand, dramatic villainy. Because their whole thing is basically, in a game where everything is larger than life, solas are seen as larger than life.
Yeah, if you're going to have your Doomsday Machine, it's going to be a Solar that builds it. If there's going to be... I was about to say if there's going to be an all-conquering army, it's going to be a Solar that's leading it, but no, Lunas can fill that as well.
Lunas can fill that as well. So could Abyssals. Lots of people could have all-conquering armies.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
But Solas do it with the most style.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bull of the North, who I'm eternally surprised we didn't manage to mention in the pre.
This is true.
Bit. It's the Bull of the North. It's like, yeah, there probably are. Well, we know the Lunas have led armies and wreaked havoc before. Abyssals have done it before. But the Bull's the one people know, because the Bull's the one who not only led an army and conquered stuff, but styled on an Imperial Legion while doing so.
Yes.
And yes, you can read that's because the entire setting turned against said legion, but it doesn't take away from the achievement of you still beat them, though.
Yes. That's the thing, that the Bull of the North, I think, is potentially a neat solar antagonist. Because I was kind of thinking of trying to think of ways to use him as an antagonist. Just because, particularly if you go to some of the older editions, his circle is detailed as doing a lot. Whereas he doesn't really have a circle in 3rd edition, so you use that as you mean.
Did they explicitly say that he doesn't have one in 3rd? Because I've still assumed that he's got one until told otherwise.
Oh yeah, it's not been mentioned, but I didn't pick up on any cues to suggest that he has others like him, whereas 2nd edition says, yeah, there's a Twilight who's actively trying to desalinate a huge frozen lake and rebuild some first age tech to make this settlement viable again. It's not as bold. There's no mention of anyone trying that sort of thing in relation to the Bull. It's just the Bull's raised a conquering army.
Yeah, but it's the thing of solar villains. This is going to be flying in the face of what 3rd tries to do, but you have to forget the gritty, low, ooh, look at us, we're wallowing in the muck sort of thing. No, if you're a solar villain, you're written by Shakespeare, you're wearing big flappy gloves and making grand proclamations.
Yes.
Like, even a Nightcast villain, who has so... Actually, no, I think a Nightcast has a lot of mileage. I wouldn't say they have the most, but a Nightcast villain, that will be... Like, well, if anyone's seen The Boys, that'll be Black Noir off of The Boys.
Oh, yeah.
It's the sort of thing of, he's just there, and you don't know why he's here, but he comes in, and then there's bodies, and then he's gone. But
yes.
Solar villains, I would say the more socially inclined ones are going to be the ones that are the more interesting to use as villains, but that just tends to be how I write. Plus Twilights. But Twilights, I would almost argue, are almost always unintentionally villains. They are antagonists, but not villains, Twilights, because their problems will be things going wrong.
They're generally the best type of villains, though, if I'm honest, because even Thanos was a hero of his own story.
Yeah, but then I'd argue that sort of Thanos motivation, I'd say that still works for a Zenith more than it does for a Twilight.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas a Twilight is going to be your Sorcerer's Apprentice, the spell's gone wrong, oh god, look what we've done sort of thing.
Yeah, for something like the Bull, it'll be a clash of priorities, because the Bull is very much tied to the Ice Walkers and trying to establish his people and so on. That's my read as to why he hasn't gone further.
Yeah, because he's Snowy Moses.
Yeah.
Although, it run into the issue of where do the Haslanti fit into this, because 3rd wants to pretend that they're not a thing anymore.
I kind of read him as Snow Genghis Khan, but he stops. That's the thing that gets me.
He has a line.
Yeah, it's the ocean. He kind of reaches the end of that plateau and
Snowy
stops.
Alexander.
Yeah, Snowy Alexander. And you have many and various ways you can spin that, actually. The kind of reasons for his death or something like that, if you want to go that far. But basically, you need to find ways to get the party to oppose the Ice Walkers, is how I would use the Bull as a villain. And I think that's general principles for any solar villain. Give them full-on motivations, and then give people legitimate reasons to oppose those motivations.
Yeah. I mean, the quickest and easiest way I think of sort of doing that is basically, if you wanted to, probably, the only reason I could find for you opposing the Ice Walkers as compared to just sort of crashing on their turf, would be if you give the Solars their own people they're trying to save. And if it's in the north, that far north is one of the exceptions to you'll be finding Immaculates, because that far north they don't care about it because the gods here have hands.
Yes.
And so they actually tend to worship them. That's the other thing that you can do with Solars that, yes, you can do with all Exalts, but it's so much more stylish when you do it with Solars. Of the fight a god on session 1, go.
Yes, I've actually done a one-shot with that. When we get the Wondrous Atlas website up and running, where we're collating all of these ideas and stuff, I will absolutely put the write-up of that one-shot idea of you take down a god in session 1 and everything that means.
Yeah, these are things that Solars are good for. I mean, the standard little put it on the cereal box line for what you do with a Solar game is just, whatever you do it big.
Yes. Yes.
Even if it's small scale and small stakes, you need to make it dramatically big, because that's what Solars are. Yeah.
Which kind of brings us into the next thought. We've talked about general thematic ideas so far as to how to use Solars in your games. The location-dependent stuff, we're not going to go into too much detail for specific locations because, again, we've got a bunch of location-based episodes coming. But the first thought of that is playing a Solars game as part of the realm and trying to remain undercover. Possibly the most serious, most dramatic way of doing this is have Solars in the Blessed Isle.
Yeah, I was going to say, we call this hard mode.
Yeah. It's any sort of hint that a Solar is around will end up with a lot of Immaculates. There's no chance that you'll get the peasants on your side, because the instant the peasants are, they are dispossessed and everything about them is burned, because there is the House Legions there to enforce all that. Particularly given the time setting of Exalted, because everyone's coming home because of the impending civil war. So everyone's on edge, everyone's looking suspicious. That you have every right to make this game about paranoia and, oh no, what's going to happen if everything goes wrong? You put one toe out of line and everything you care about is burned.
Yeah, if you want to make your Exalted game feel like Call of Cthulhu, you set it... I was going to say, I would have gone one step further than the Blessed Isle. Set it in the Imperial City. You cannot so much as breathe solarly.
I wouldn't say that they exalted in the Imperial City. That's going to make life very complicated, but...
No, but having them be there... I mean, hell, you mentioned the Civil War. If you want to have that sort of very, very high risk, very, very high reward, there's measures for some Solars with beef against the realm. They may have even exalted off of the Isle. They may have exalted like out in the Scavenger Lands, out in the north, wherever. They've come to the Isle because everyone knows there's something's about to kick off, and they're going to make sure that it kicks off bad.
Yes, in which case you're looking for an awful lot of social manipulation and everything else, in which case the setup for that is a lot of political NPCs with intimacies out the wazoo and a lot of stuff clocked into the Immaculates. Also, for that sort of a situation, I would try and find reasons to try and convince players to use their essence beyond the normal. Give them temptations to do it and reasons to turn it down.
They've got the hammer of essence, and you're just laying out a lot of nails.
Yes! That's absolutely the thing. I'm not sure quite what those look like, having said that, because, I mean, apart from just pumping vast amounts of personal essence into excellencies...
There's the social side, sure, but equally, you can give them a lot of... Because the key thing is here, they're hiding that they're solar. They're also presumably going to have to be hiding that they're anything other than immortal, which does mean that in lots of cases... You can play to the solar hubris a lot by making them just sort of... I like the bit of... I'm assuming there has to be an eclipse somewhere, because if you're doing a game this political, someone's putting an eclipse in it. Mm-hmm. It's that sort of bit where you are having to make them deal with the Immaculate Order, specifically. Perhaps even just sort of the bit of the really... The thing with Solars, if you've got players that understand Solars well, when they see an Immaculate monk preaching in the street about the evils of the solar devil, they'll want to sort of stand up and start arguing with him. You give them that sort of bit. Or equally, the real challenge, you put an anathema NPC of some kind in there that they've got, and you go for the public execution thing of just like, yeah, you want to try and save them? You know what this does.
Yep.
You get outed. You get an NPC party member here, but this is you out now if they got it. Because they do sort of make a thing throughout that a lot of the anathema, if they don't get killed on sight, they get brought to the Isle to be thrown in the super dungeon.
Absolutely. It's kind of the emphasis of you know what the consequences are if you don't do something sort of thing. Yeah.
You've just got to keep giving them moral quandary after moral quandary of how far are you willing to compromise yourself to get this goal of basically blowing the realm up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've also got the smaller stakes one of that, of doing something similar in a satrapy.
Oh, yeah. Or, I mean, out in the West is the default way to do this. Start the war in the West as a solar. Steal a boat, fly a Pelep's flag, start blowing things up for fun.
Yes, which is also a very good way to get everyone used to all of the various combat situations, because you're dealing with strategic stuff there, you're dealing with naval combat, and yeah, I know, naval combat needs work.
But yeah, you can do that in a satrapy. You could do that in a city, frankly. I think out of Charge End, you could do that in a city. Equally, we mentioned the Bull earlier. There's lots of merit for the Bull as a villain. Mm-hmm. There's equal merit for the Bull as not necessarily a hero, unless you do this in a very specific place, but as model, because everyone's heard about him. That's kind of his thing. You are a solar, probably freshly exalted, and all you know is the Bull of the North. Like, okay, we know he's evil and all they've said that, but now thinking of it, I'm one of those. I kind of get hers with, oh, he just freed his people from X or Y oppression. Get me my crook, it's time to be Moses. It's that bit of either kicking out the local satrap or kicking out the guild, because where the realm isn't, the guild is.
Yes.
And they're arguably even worse.
Yes, because they won't have any truck with any exalts whatsoever.
But also, equally, they're a lot easier to beat up, because they're all human, which makes them perfect for your sort of starter adventure villain. Of, they hate you, they're pretty much irredeemable.
Yeah, they have got the whole, they are the biggest slavers in the setting, so...
They're the biggest slavers, they are the malign face of capitalism in every possible way.
Yes.
Like, they do the slavery, they wreck places, the stuff they do in the north is... I mean, it's the standard thing of the Haslanti Empire, at least back when the Haslanti Empire was written about. It kills guild caravans on site at the border, because of how the guild ran the place when it was in charge. They are the... Again, in just the eternal string of references to things that have very little exalted theming, they are the company from Snowpiercer.
Yeah, or the Wayland Corporation, although Wayland is a bit more R&D than the Guild, but...
Yeah. It's all about the profit.
They're your bad everything company.
Yes. Evil Incorporated.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's about run the gamut of all of the hook ideas that we had. Was there anything else that's sort of come up for you as just brief hooks while we've been discussing stuff?
I was going to say, other than the default game, which I can't even say is the default solo game, it's just the default Exalted game, which is, here you are in the 100 Kingdoms, go, do Kingmaker. Which is... It feels almost lazy to mention because it is so much the default game.
Yeah, it's finding ways of making that interesting.
I mean, the more interesting one I find than the 100 Kingdoms is doing something in the Scavenger Lands, because that's basically the only bit of creation that isn't actively hostile to human life, that isn't particularly strongly immaculate. You've got Lookshy, but everywhere else kind of is a bit more religiously tolerant.
Yeah, it's kind of your excuse to build your own setting. That's manifestly what it's there for.
As I say, it's the place where you can be solar openly and be actually lauded for it if you're doing good things. If doing it in the realm is hard mode, doing it in the Scavenger Lands is easy mode. Because you can go to Bonfire and, sure, some Lookshyans might try and hunt you down, but the rest of the cities, you do it in Nexus will just be like, did you cause any property damage? No. Okay, carry on. You do it in Great Forks, someone will give you a job.
Yeah, as much as it's easy mode, you still need to find some ways to restrain them in some sense. There needs to be some token challenge.
Yeah, it's more that the Scavenger Lands is the place that you can go when you want to actually have, for use of better, where you want to have a villain as compared to the whole setting is evil. Because that is the place where, no, this guy, you have to go to Bonfire if you want to fight him. Yeah, you can do it here and there's less repercussion, whereas in the realm, I have to use all my essence, go to Bonfire to defeat this guy. But the moment I do that, I've basically signed my own death warrant.
Yeah, you can pull that off in the West as well, but to a lesser degree. It depends on what your campaign setup is. If you want a more conventional land-based one where it's not all about piracy, then Scavenger Lands you kind of have to have.
Equally, the Scavenger Lands is good if you want to do dungeon crawls, because it's literally full of dungeons.
Yeah, I would personally lean away from that simply because dungeon crawls are there for when it's a challenge to overcome the monsters.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find this out in the next section, but I would kind of take this as a prelude to something else and a session rather than a way to run a campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I've done some dungeon crawly bits in my games. I tend towards he's about him Zelda-esque dungeon design, where it's less the monsters in the dungeon that you're worried about and more, because again, this is the damage that's Exalted. Welcome to the Magitech Emporium. Do you know how this place works? The whole place is a puzzle, and this is how it fits together, that sort of bit.
Yeah. That makes sense. And with that, did we want to get to our last section, which is basically, we've talked about a bunch of story hooks and ideas here, and we will keep on talking about story hooks and everything else. This is where we get to the point where we've fleshed everything out to the point where hopefully it's something usable. And when we get to the Wondrous Atlas of Creation website, which I believe in the interim, or at least the start of it, will be wondrousatlas.wordpress.com. And then you will find write-ups for all of the stuff that we're about to talk about in a usable form for being part of your adventures. We may have campaigns written out here. We may have sessions, anything in between, depending on what stories have seized us. I've already vaguely teased mine. I've got my particular campaign set up. I call it Retake Your Ancient Heritage, which is a game where you are tracking down artifacts and you are essentially finding your own tomb, is the culmination of that story. I'll get to it in a bit more detail when we get into conversation and stuff, but Rels, did you want to talk through yours?
I was going to say, as we sort of have here, the structure here is both of us, without communication on it, went off and wrote what we thought would be a very, not necessarily the archetypal, but a very good, in this case, solar adventure. Aramithius went for a nice sort of artifact hunty, dungeon crawly, well, not dungeon crawly, but, you know, go to places, find loot sort of thing. I went to the complete opposite. Welcome to Pirates of the Blackstone. We're going much more swashbuckling, much more...
awesome.
Not necessarily that, it's more... Yours has room to breathe. Mine, and you'll see this the more I do these, I tend to write adventures at a very, very clippy pace, which it works for the players I tend to associate with. Your mileage may vary.
That's fair enough, yeah. Okay, so I'll talk through mine first because it's, I think, probably the quicker of the two. I kind of had a vision of this being either in the Scavenger Lands as the most likely place or somewhere in the south, simply because my visuals for a lot of this are kind of sand-covered ruins and the like. The biggest thing about this, the end goal of the thing is basically the Solars find their old artifacts from their previous reincarnations, which gives you a possibility of putting some reward at the end of a campaign, as well as setting up both some character development and the possibility of seeding something else as you go. The key thing is kind of preload a lot of the stuff before the actual finding to get the players invested. I kind of imagined this as sort of an initial scene setting for a larger campaign, maybe. Depending on how fast you want to take it, it could almost even be a prelude setting where they find the artifacts that they've all bought as merits, depending. And a lot of this will depend on what your setting is. I had images for kind of multiple contexts for this, that the key thing is that the player characters find out that there is an artifact smuggling ring going on in the city that they're a part of. If you want some way to kind of drag them into it, make sure that it's clear that the funds for this are going to line the pockets of an antagonist that they already know about, so they have a reason to disrupt, even if they don't think, ooh, artifacts, let's have those instead of random person. They can know that, oh, if we run interference here, then it's going to disrupt our big bad. So there's conversations somewhere, depending on what the tone of your circle is. The images that I had were either a watering hole near some docks and traders, that you're overhearing some of the smugglers talk about where they're pulling stuff from, depending on where they are. Or if it's a bit more upscale, you hear about conversations in a tea house that are potentially linked to an illicit auction where these artifacts are being auctioned off. Then you can either engage the smugglers directly and squeeze out the location from them in whatever way. So that's either intimidation or saying, you obviously need protection. Let's act as an escort as you get your next load, however you will. For the tea house and the auction house, it's a case of finding out who's supplying the auctioneers and everything that's involved there. You can potentially name drop some of the dragon-blooded involved. I had the kind of the eventual masterminders, the sort of industrial scale Indiana Jones being a Tepet who's down on his luck and really not a fit within a military house, so is trying to do her bit for the house by either procuring stuff for the war effort or being entirely selfish and thinking, well, I'm not going to find glory because of my house, I'm just going to get rich, depending on what motive best serves your campaign. So they're either funding the auction or they're running the dig site. So depending on how you wanted to run this, I had visions of either helping the smugglers out or beating up the smugglers, taking the map. It's saying ruins here. Then there's the journey from the city to the place, which I kind of envisioned as both a way to set the scene, have some prophetic dreams in the weeks that it takes you to get to the site, as well as potentially making sure that they're not followed, have some bandits waylay them on the way, particularly if they are silly enough to take a huge caravan, and also to potentially hobble them a bit and let them feel their limits, because if they don't plan, let those environmental hazards sink in, let them feel the effects of starvation. If they just want to say, we have the map, let's run, and off they go, then yeah, this is going to be several weeks, you're going to be living off the land, so if you didn't take survival, it's going to hurt. So once that is up, with whatever encounters you want to throw them on the way, either with the smugglers or the organisation that's running the auction, however you want to spin that, they arrive at base camp, which is very, very obviously a ruined city, and it's badly maintained apart from this one tomb, which is very, very obviously something that's built in a different style with different stone to everything else. Because the way I see solar tombs is that they were built by the dragon-blooded to appease the ghosts. So they're not part of the solar empire, they're something that's grafted on top. Is very much how I see that. So you arrive, you've then either got to reckon with the guards and tear through everyone, or if you're doing the diplomatic route, you turn up and talk with the head of the expedition, with Tepit Kinra, persuade her that you know roughly what you're doing and that you can help out, or why she should bother with you as something for her enterprise going forward, and then head into the tomb. I had 3 chambers of traps, which is again designed to soften up the solars rather than do anything particularly bad. Again, make them feel their limitations, which is a good trick, frankly, because you can't really fight environmental hazards very effectively. So if you want to soften up solars to the point where they're actually going to feel their vulnerability, then use environmental hazards a lot. So there's things like fire traps, noxious gases in particular chambers, and things that emphasize the layout and the dragon-bloodedness of the actual tomb. Like, I set a fire trap in the room where all the embalming was done, which is set to cremate everything in the room if there's some unauthorized kind of movement in there. The trick is that the trigger to go into the next room is a statue of Hesiesh, which has a claw outstretched. Sorry, just to translate, Hesiesh is one of the Immaculate Dragons who was responsible for making sure that all of the people who were massacred during the usurpation did not rise as hungry ghosts. So there's a statue of Hesiesh with a claw outstretched. The trap shuts off either when a dragon-blooded touches it, if you've managed to persuade Kinyara that she should come along for the ride and keep her alive, or you smear dragon-blooded blood on it. So, depending on exactly what the party have done with her, there's a way through. Little tricks like that to kind of disengage the traps and move on to the next room. I'm not really a huge fan of dungeon crawls in Exalted because, as I say, I don't consider them a challenge, so I've just stacked these one room after another. And I also think a tomb wouldn't be designed as a maze anyway. And then the final chamber is an encounter with the ghosts that can either be a fight, depending on how you want to present them, or a negotiation and an expansion of the character's own histories. If Kinyara is still alive then it's a perfect opportunity for her to absolutely flip when the ghosts very obviously realise what the players are, and she either attacks you or flees out of the place and attempts to seal you in. And that's pretty much the end of it. You deal with Kinyara however you see fit, and the remainder of the retinue that are in the tented village outside the place, running the actual dig, and then you stride off into the sunset with your new shinies, which are tailored to what's best suited to the players. This will involve a lot of work with the players to work out what story elements are going to key in with the characters and make them drive it forward, and little tricks like, I was thinking of ways that if they wind up fighting the solar ghosts, then I also saw it that you could potentially tack on some of the solar charms that the players have taken onto the Hungry Ghost stats, as well as expanding the dice pools so that it's very obvious they're fighting some sort of mirror image of themselves.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that works. That is... And you'll hear us say this a lot, of tailor this to your specific party, because...
Yes.
Like, okay, yes, that's generally for RPGs in general you want to do this, but Exalted in particular ceases to function if you don't.
Yeah. Which is why I was trying to present multiple ways of getting on board with it. If they're low class, go with the smugglers. If they're high class, go with the auction house. That sort of thing.
I've kind of just foregone that bit of how you onboard it, because I'm pretty much assuming you won't use this as the first part of your adventure. It requires the players to already have a boat, but equally, I like starting in medias res for lots of stuff, and that's pretty much what my thing says as well. It's like, if you're slotting it into an adventure, great, do it after they got the boat. If you're not, you have a boat, begin. But yeah, setting-wise, my one, you could put it in the West. The West is the place that I wrote it in mind with. This doesn't even have to be on the water, is the thing that I have sort of realised across the time looking at it. You can put this anywhere that there's a Death Lord. Or really, anywhere that there's a significant supernatural power. You could do it with a particularly powerful fairy if you knew what you were doing. But it's easiest to do with Death Lords in any flavour, because this is, as you'll see, it's much less about the piracy, and much more about the people. So, welcome to the West. I'd start this in medias res. Again, if you're putting it in the middle, in your Western game, this is when your party already has a ship of their own. If you're putting it anywhere else, you can actually just have it start at point of here, of raiding a guild's slave ship to free all the slaves, take them back to this local island, stroke if you're putting it on land somewhere, town or whatever. The whole thing is basically start at point of start for this adventure thing. It's keying in, no, your party, you are heroic. That's the one thing you do have to key with your players. It's like, you're not going to be the whole, morally grey, slightly bastardly soulless. Like, you can do atrocious things to these guildsmen, but you are doing good, and the local people, if they know you as soulless, they know you as soulless secondary to knowing you as, they're the guys that keep freeing those slaves and keep screwing over the guild or the realm or any other number of people doing bad things. Like, you are, again, in the West, you are the kind-hearted pirates sort of thing that everyone knows you steal for a living, but you steal from the bastards and have made our lives a bit easier in so doing. I've sort of set this around the Blackstone Archipelago, which we'll get to in our Western episode. It's a funny place to be. It's where all of the ghost pirates live. And basically, you do that as you're sort of opening to session 1. If it's new players and you just drop them in medias res here, which I wouldn't really advise for this one, but you could still do, it's to get them used with the combat system. Because this won't be a ship battle, this will be a you swinging in on ropes, yahar, pirate fight. So it's just a regular fight that happens to be on a boat. And you'll be going to drive back the people that you freed to drop them off on a nearby island, in a nearby town or whatever, when you see there's a bunch of ships, stroke smoke coming out from the town if you're on land again. And at this point I'll stop giving the land-based alternative because it'll be obvious from there. But you see a bunch of ships around the place, flying the black flag of the Bodhisattva anointed by dark waters, who is the local Death Lord. And here, I'll open up right now. I'll get angry letters that you've misunderstood how the Bodhisattva is. Yes, I haven't read much about the Bodhisattva. I am assuming this off Death Lords in general, of which my point of experience is Walker in Darkness and the Mask of Winters. But, basically, he has sent an agent to this island because he demands tribute for whatever reason. Be that in the form of treasure, or be that in the form of people, depending on how dark you want your tone to get. But he's got someone there to exact tribute as you're coming back. And the key here is basically to get your players to hate this villain right out the gates. So you're having them arrive just a little bit too late. It is, again, smoke coming out of the town. They didn't have enough to pay. And so, as you get there, the sort of first major choice that your players have is, okay, they're packing up and leaving. Do we chase these enforcers, or do we go in there and try and see if there's anything left to save? If they go in for seeing if there's anything left to save, give them some people that have survived, make the place full of zombies, give them another easy enough fight for someone like them, especially because they're soulless and these are undead, which is something else we didn't mention. That's one of the easiest things that you can have them fight. Solar anima damages undead, because true sunlight messes them up. But yeah, give them some zombies to fight, all of that bit, and the few villagers that are left can be used to sort of big up this abyssal enforcer that he sent out there. A death knight that, in the case of mine, I refer to them as the Fang of the Drowned Beast, because all abyssals have to have extremely melodramatic names, it's the law. But if they go to chase the enforcer instead, we tacitly assume the village didn't have any survivors, and because, well, even if it did, it wouldn't if you decided to ignore them. And you get to teach your players the sailing rules as they get involved in a sea chase. I have issue with the sailing rules, but it's important to know them. They're not good. Find a homebrew. Someone's made good ones. Somewhere. But you can do a sea chase with them, trying to hunt them down. Probably in your one clippy ship to their quite a few ships, but only one of which has anything scary on it.
With obstacles, please make sea chases interesting and descriptive, because there's nothing more boring than rolling dice representing you catching up to someone in blue water.
Yeah, I'm tacitly assuming these are, because they're sent by a Death Lord, of course, they are ghost ships, so the danger is coming from them rather than the inclement water. So it's the thing of like, you might roll dice a bit, but the moment they know you're after them, it's like, now, roll dice while you're being attacked by ghosts.
Yeah, there is that.
It's that sort of thing of maybe even doing the alternation of trying to have like one player in the party try and take the helm to roll the dice, but that means that they don't get to go that round in the combat when you haven't ghosted them. Something gimmicky like that, whereas you get to basically choose between keeping control of your ship or stabbing the scary things that are trying to fly at you. But yeah, you can, either way, you do that, and if party went to the village, they tell them who this enforcer is, they tell her what she's about, how scary she is to big her up. If they chase her, they get to try and hunt her down. Probably drop one of the ghost ships, but not hers. It'll be the bit of, you see her sort of sneering over the back deck as she just gets away, sort of bit. And at that point, this is one that you can stretch out to a very select number of sessions, depending on how many episodes of this effectively you want to do, because there are lots of little things you can do here with this person. As if you are the Pirates of the Caribbean, this is your Lord Cutler Beckett, who is coming in, being a bastard, ruining someone's day. Like, some of the little ideas that I sort of had is basically you going to some of the towns that actually do pay tribute and busting people out of prison or raiding the places dry. She's coming in pretty much at the head of an army all the time, so it is, much like we were saying with the Wild Hunt before, it is no, you don't pick this fight, you run away, but you are slowly bleeding them dry. And you as a storyteller probably should keep track, especially if you're giving the players the choices. I would always advise to keep giving them the choice of how much of this they want to keep doing before basically you decide to come into the climax bit, which would probably be a straight up, not necessarily ship battle. I'd actually rather do this one on land, just because ship combat really doesn't lend itself to feeling dramatic. So the way that I sort of have this put is pretty much one of the local elemental courts of water, the sort of equivalent where you get sea gods. The Bodhisattva has decided that he wants them on side. If he gets them on side, that's basically put an end to you and all of the freedom in the waters out here. And you basically do get to do the end of Pirates of the Caribbean 2 with the whirlpool and the big scary sea thing, except instead of scrapping with it, effectively you're trying to convince it on who to side with, presumably while also fighting this abyssal, because if you want maximum drama, it being a elemental, which are, they're not stupid things, but elementals are simple. That's not thick, it's just, they are what they say on the tin. And so you have this one be basically like, no, okay, prove you're better than them, and get free classic scrap.
That's also one way of getting different types of character involved, because if you have a more social character that won't necessarily want to be involved in the combat, then...
Yeah, and it's that sort of thing of basically fighting while arguing politics with a massive sea monster. That's how I'm imagining this water elemental looks.
How very anime.
Exactly, that's the point. And it's sort of the thing of, the goal here isn't actually to kill your opponent, it's just to convince that thing in the middle, because once it's made its mind up, both of you kind of know, yeah, it's not going to change, it's elementals. But that allows you to then, if you particularly want to, if your party particularly falls in love with this absolute bastard of an abyssal, you can use them as a sort of recurring villain across this saga, and then probably bring her back in maybe once or twice more before the players finally get to put her down for good. But it's that sort of thing of, this is one that can go on for, you could probably do it in 2 sessions, or you could do it in about 12, depending on how many vignettes, effectively, you slot into that middle section between that first chase where you meet her and the climax.
Yeah, that makes sense. You could almost use that as sort of tension building, that you get introduced to various lieutenants of hers throughout the whole process, each of whom's doing something particularly villainous on this particular island.
Yeah, and it's the key sort of thing of, it's how to make sure that this sort of adventure section is enjoyed with your players but doesn't overstay its welcome, so you can tailor exactly how long it has to go on for. And equally as well, like I said, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the water. It was completely designed with the West in mind, complete with sea monster at the end. You can do this anywhere there's a Death Lord and just have them be bullying the local populace, and then a grand finale near some big supernatural monster that they want.
Yeah.
I've got a lot more anime.
Oh, yeah. But with both of these, as I said, an awful lot of it feels like it's very dependent on the party, and make sure that you have links and hooks of ways to get your players invested.
Yeah, I tacitly assume with mine that your party is already familiar with the place and likes the people. Like, make that just be their home or something.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's also something you can kind of link in with that midsection of island adventures. If they have particular locations or particular people that they've created at Character Gen, you link that in at that point.
Yeah. It's basically an excuse to do all of the pirate stereotypes.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, fantastic. Okay, I think that is us done for this episode. Thank you ever so much for taking the time to listen to us. We have been the Wondrous Atlas of Creation. Please, if you have any questions or anything you want us to look at, please do email us at wondrousatlas@gmail.com. And because I'm well aware there are multiple ways of spelling wondrous, this has the E in wonder in it. Or find us on Twitter. The show is at Wondrous Atlas. We do hope you've enjoyed it. And next time we will be discussing the mates to the Solars. Well, mates, consorts, advisors, whatever way you want to spin it, and we will be going into all of the connotations and reasons for that. We will be discussing the Lunars.
In the furry episode.
Absolutely. Thank you ever so much for listening, and goodbye. Thank you for listening to the Wondrous Atlas of Creation's Destiny, an Exalted podcast presented by Aramithius and Rails. Check out the show notes and story seeds from this episode at wondrousatlas.wordpress.com, and if you have any questions, drop us an email at wondrousatlas@gmail.com. The opening music for this podcast is Travelling to the Blessed Isle by James Semple, and the closing music is Exploring Creation, also by James Semple. Both tracks are taken from the album Exalted, Dreams of the Second Age, and are property of Onyx Path Publishing, used with permission.
So, thanks to Black and the people on our Discord for all of this, because we've got errata. We actually make mistakes. I too am surprised that I am not a perfect arbiter of all knowledge.
You learn something new every day.
Yeah. The third edition has changed the first age a little bit. It's made it less of a solar dictatorship. In older editions, basically the Solars ran the first age. And the corollary was weirdly like, that's why it was so good. But the Solars ran the first age, and everyone else had roles that were effectively beneath them. Third has made it a lot more egalitarian and utopian, which is... I'm actually in favour of this change from third edition, because it means the Sidereals are even worse and even more stupid for doing what they did.
Not that you're biased or anything.
I'm not. I have the correct opinion on Sidereals. But yes, they have the Solars in third as a sort of first among equals and a catalyst unifier sort of thing. And yeah, a lot of the realm deliberative, or the second deliberative as the name has been changed to, a lot of its success is the fact that the Solars, when they were building their one big tent under which all Exalts could rule, I assume that if they want to be truly utopian, humans are involved as well, but let's be honest, it's Solars. No. They made an infrastructure that basically allows you to run a global empire with relative ease.
Yep. Next up, we mentioned that there's various things missing from the way that the Bull in the North is portrayed. We don't have a huge amount of details on him as of the time of this recording, but we are apparently going to get some third edition stuff, including the Bull's Circle. We're expecting that to arrive in Across the Eight Directions, which isn't published yet as of the time of this recording. But we also have little hints that the various things that the Bull's Circle and so on are doing are potentially going to be things that are left for the player characters out there to solve, rather than being things that the Bull's Circle has been up to. Things like the Salt Spire League and the Salt Spires being broken as a thing that the Twilight in the Bull's Circle fixing being a thing in previous editions. That's probably going to be something that is left as a story hook for player characters, particularly given the way that third edition is behaving at the moment with regards to throwing out story hooks at every conceivable moment, which is lovely.
Yes. And equally, they've also changed something from second. Third has... Because the map has changed, this isn't mentioned in the errata, but this is how I'm interpreting this, because the actual geography of the map has changed a lot for the north. Well, for everywhere, between second and third. Where the Bull is in third, looks a lot different, and it's a lot weirder that he isn't being hyper-aggressive. They've played the battle with Tepet, the Battle of Futile Blood, as we know the big punch for that was, bloodied the bull just as much as it bloodied Tepet, even though the realm sees it as a Pyrrhic victory, if not a cataclysmic loss. It was more of, we did roughly equal damage to each other, they just weren't expecting it. Whereas in second, he's aggressively expanding, and basically if you're anywhere within the same postcode as anyone who's ever seen the bull, you have to be careful because some Vikings might appear.
Yes, that's true, and we presumably, again, will get more when the various bits of the north get expanded on in across the 8 directions.